Yeah, that's not one. I want to see it. I'll make sure it's basically done for. And the below. Okay. Yeah, I found a bunch of. Go to the library website. Just tell me article. Yeah, I think interesting. I'm not interested in all academic, but still, it is interesting. For us, like reading, not practice. It's the point. There's right. That's the point. I had to go back and delete the page.
All right, it's 1 o'clock. Let's go and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good to hear. So I did grade your exams. So your grade should be on Canvas already. Just to remind you, so one of the things I do for this class is that I sort your midterm grades. So one midterm grade is worth 30% of your grade, your other one is worth 20%. And whichever one you scored better in, I made 30% of your grade. So I should have already done that. And so just, I would just go back on Canvas, just double check. And so the score that you got for midterm 2 on there may not reflect what you actually got. But if you scored better on your second midterm than your first one, then I'd swap them so that your higher midterm score just counts for more of your grade. Okay. So just double check that just to make sure it's all good. And I have the exams to give back for today. But I graded them in such a rush that I didn't even check the average. I think Canvas tells you the average for these things, so you can check it out. Okay. All right, and so today we're just continuing on with our ethics discussions. We left off last time talking a little bit about kind of company culture, kind of the relationship with your manager. So I have just one more kind of section on that. And then we're going to spend probably most of the time today talking about disobedience. I don't like that word for it, but it's kind of the official word for it, and whistleblower. And so we'll talk about what that means and kind of how to protect yourself in those situations. Okay. All right. So other announcements. So next week, next week is our last week of lecture itself. We do have one more week after that, but that week is going to be just all final presentations. So what I'm going to do early next week is that I'm going to determine the presentation order. You guys should start thinking about your presentation. I'm going to put a template for the final presentation online. It's not that much of a template. Basically, just I want slides for each section on the rubric. Right? So definitely take a look at that and definitely start discussing with your group in terms of putting that together. Remember, for the final presentation, it's not as in-depth as the final report, so you don't have to have absolutely everything kind of figured out at this point. But you should have enough to kind of tell a full story, right? Remember, you're the only one, your group is the only one in this class that's really kind of diving deep into this case study. And, I want you guys to use the final presentation to kind of, let everyone else know about this, right? Because there's been a lot of engineering ethical case studies over the years. A lot of them, if you think about it, a lot of them in very recent memory as well. And so, we don't have enough time to go over all of them in the class. And so, I want you guys to present these to kind of, not only just so that you get practice kind of presenting these kinds of things, but also that you can learn kind of what other people have been looking into as well. And, and pretty much all these stories are all fascinating for one reason or another. And so, definitely I would, I think the tempting thing is to only come to class on the day you have your presentation. I don't blame you guys for that. I was kind of the same way, but I'm hoping that you guys all come to everyone's presentations and see them all, just because they're all just very fascinating stories, right? It's not the same as kind of sitting through a lecture. It's kind of sitting through story time, and story time is just naturally a lot of fun. Oh, the other thing I did yesterday was I went through all of your guys' homework 6, so your individual writing assignments. I think maybe 1 or 2 came in this morning, so I need to go back and grade them. But I did give you guys grades for those, and then make sure you look at the rubric that I uploaded as well. As for everyone, I try to leave some pretty detailed comments in terms of what I liked about your paper, and what things that I can see you guys improve on the final report. So definitely take a look at those. And incorporate those comments into your final report. I would say kind of the two most common comments that I made for people is that, number one, I think for the most part, everyone did a pretty good job recounting all the facts. And so you guys, for the most part, did a pretty good job, looking up your sources and recounting everything that happened, which is good. That's an important part of the report. But the thing that I'm kind of more interested in for your final projects is to, for you guys to kind of comment on it and analyze it and give me your own perspective on kind of how things happen through the lens of engineering ethics, right? It's one thing to report that, yes, the Ford Pinto blew up a lot, but, I want you guys to kind of analyze that and say, like, how is this unethical, right? What specific aspects of the professional codes of ethics were violated in these situations, and what you could have done better, right? So, less, little less just reporting the facts and more of your own opinions, your own commentary of what's happening. So I think that's probably the main thing I saw for the majority of the reports. The other thing is a smaller thing, but I know in the rubric that I said that, I would like for you guys to include pictures and figures. But if you include a picture or figure in your report, it should be done with purpose. And so what I saw a lot of in your guys' individual writing assignments was that you guys put a picture in there. Maybe it's a nice high definition photo of a Pinto blowing up or something like that. But the figures there should support what you're writing about in the text, right? I think some of the best examples of this is that some people included some figures of sales data for the Pinto, and then I think people talked about at a certain point when the accident started happening, then the sales kind of plummeted for the Pinto, and that kind of supported what you were talking about in the text. I think that's a great example. I think another great example is, so I have a lot of examples from the Pinto, because I think 90% of people wrote about the Pinto. Another great example was that when people were talking about kind of the technical kind of aspects of the Pinto in terms of why it was dangerous, the fuel tank location, people included like a technical drawing of the Pinto, kind of showing where it's located, and that supported your text. So I think those are really good examples. But other times, I think a lot of people just kind of put a picture in there just for the sake of it, and then kind of didn't really address it in the text. And so if you're going to include figures in your report, and I do expect, at least a few figures in your report, just make sure that it's done with purpose, and that it supports kind of what you're talking about. It's not just placed there just to take up space, right? Okay. But besides that, I think for the most part, you guys did a good job on the writing. So I'm looking forward to kind of reading your final projects. All right. Any questions on any of that before we get started for today? Okay. All right. So let's dive into it. So I know I have it as learning objective 3, but I actually kind of want to start with this one. Just because the theme of our lecture on Tuesday was talking about your role in a company and your relationships with your managers and kind of that stuff, right? And so when it comes to decision making in an engineering company, there are certain types of decisions that should be made by you as the engineer, or maybe you the manager, right? So maybe you eventually you kind of work your way up into the company and you become an engineering manager. But there's certain types of decisions and there's certain types of issues that some people should make the decision for, and then other ones where other people must make the decision for. And so I want to kind of talk about that a little bit today. Okay. Because when you're working on a project that's as complex as an engineering one, right? The technical side of an engineering project obviously is very complicated, right? But then there's also the economical side, the business side to it, the marketing side. So there's a lot of things that have to go right for an engineering project to really succeed. But because of that complexity, there's oftentimes a lot of different types of decisions that have to be made as well. And so the question then becomes, what is the best way to divide the responsibilities between, the engineers and the managers, to make sure that everything kind of runs smoothly. All right, and so we can kind of classify two types of kind of decisions that have to be made, right? So there's one type of decision that we can call a proper engineering decision. So proper engineering decision, this should be made by the people with the highest amount of technical expertise on the team, which, in all likelihood is probably going to be you because you're the engineer, okay? And so a proper engineering decision are ones that involve technical matters, that involve engineering expertise. And so this could be, choosing the best component, right? Maybe there's a certain component that's going to work best just from a technical standpoint, maybe from efficiency or things like that. So any kind of technical matter like that, an engineer should be deciding those. Okay. Um, another type of a decision that should be made by engineers are the ones that fall within the ethical standards in that are kind of embodied in their professional codes. Because if it involves, your engineering codes, things that have to do with safety, reliability, keeping people safe, the environment, things like that, then, the engineer should at least play a major role in the decision. Okay. All right. And so the opposite, or not the opposite of this, but then kind of the other side of the coin here is decisions that should be made by management. So we call those proper management decisions. Okay. So a decision that should be made by a manager are ones that involve, the kind of the overall well-being or the overall success of the company as a business. So this kind of falls into, these are kind of most of the what we call kind of business matters. So things like costs, scheduling, marketing, things like that. Things like employee morale as well. Okay. So I kind of group all these things together. So these are kind of like the business, I call them the business aspect of running a company. Okay. So I'm going through this for a couple of reasons. And so, the first reason is to kind of, just to kind of show you that, there for technical matters, in terms of selecting parts and what will work best and things like that, you as the engineer should have a significant say in terms of what's going to be decided, right? And so this is kind of give you, just this is mostly just to kind of illustrate to you that you do have decision making capabilities, right? You may not get that sense from your company, but your manager isn't the only one that gets to make these kinds of decisions, especially if they involve kind of technical expertise or technical matters. You should have a say in kind of what's being decided. Okay. The other reason I'm kind of going over this is that there are also some decisions, there are also some matters and issues within your company that are, for lack of a better term, they're above your pay grade, right? And so things like marketing, scheduling, costs, right? So those are not your responsibilities typically as an engineer, unless you are an engineering manager, right? And so if you are asked to kind of decide those kind of things, or to kind of commit your time to some of those things, or to kind of use part of your day to do some of these things, then that's you can very honestly say that this is not part of your job description. This is not your responsibility. Okay. Okay, so let's do. I have a few examples, a few kind of theoretical scenarios, and then we can kind of classify these as whether they're a proper engineering decision or a proper management decision, or maybe it's going to require both, right? And so, maybe there's some decisions that require compromise between the two. Okay. Okay. So let's do the first example. Okay. So let's say that you're working for an engineering firm and you need to purchase a valve for your product. Okay. And there are two valves that you're considering. So there's valve A versus valve B. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about valve B first. So valve B is sold by a friend of your manager. Right? And so because you're going to have that kind of business connection there, he's able to offer it to you at a lower price. Okay. But let's say that valve B it has a history of not being able to meet the minimum specifications that are required for the project. Okay. So maybe there's some issue with safety, or maybe there's some issues with the reliability. Maybe it's not rated for the amount of pressure that you're putting it through, right? That happens a lot, and so maybe your manager's friend is selling this part, but it's just not a good fit for your project, right? So valve A, on the other hand, valve A is advertised to meet all the requirements that you need to. But there's no connection there, so it is going to be more expensive. So let's say that it's 15% more expensive. Okay. Okay, and so your company is trying to decide which one of these, and then the head of the company is going to see who should make the decision on what valve that we should get with these kind of considerations, right? So should this be a decision made by the engineers, or is this a decision that should be made by the manager? Engineer, right? So the red flag, of course, here is that this valve B, even though it's a great price, it doesn't even meet the requirements for the job, right? And so you're going to try to, put a round peg into a square hole, right? To kind of put it, casually like that. And so it could be that, the most common things that, maybe you have a very high pressure flow. And so this valve isn't rated for that high pressure. And so if you put it into your device, it's probably going to rupture, it's going to break and cause an issue. Another common thing is that maybe that this valve doesn't have any protection against corrosion. And so, maybe you're transporting some highly acidic, material. And so it's going to corrode the valve and then cause issues later on. And so, for this kind of situation where it's the technical requirements, the project requirements, this is something that should be made by the engineers. Right. And hopefully, you have a company that kind of supports you in making that decision. Okay. So let's do another example. Okay. It'll be a similar decision. So let's say that we're considering between two different valves. Just so it's different from the last one, I'll call it valve C versus valve D. Okay. Right. But this time, let's say we're going to say that both valves meet the minimum requirements, and in fact, they both have the same performance. Okay. So there's no difference, or maybe it's a very negligible difference, or maybe there's no, for your particular project, there's, both valves will work equally the same. Okay. And they both have very similar kind of ratings and things like that. Okay. Okay. But the difference is that let's say that valve D is 15% cheaper. Okay. Let's say that valve B also can be supplied quicker, so there's less lead time. And let's say that valve D is supplied by a company that could be a potential customer for your own company, right? So just whatever you produce can also be of use to that company. Right. So there's an opportunity here to kind of not only get a good valve, but also kind of build a business relationship. Okay. Valve C, on the other hand, it is more expensive. There's a little bit more of a lead time. But let's say that valve C is supplied by a huge company. Okay. Right. So you don't, so your own company doesn't have any relationships with this company, but if you were to kind of build a relationship with this really big company, it can lead to a lot more opportunities in the future, right? So Valve D, let's say it's supplied by a relatively smaller company, maybe one that's more local. Valve C is kind of maybe is provided by this kind of huge corporation with a lot of different connections. Okay. Okay. And so building a relationship with this bigger company would be, more beneficial in the long run for your company. All right, but from a technical perspective, these two valves are the same. Right? So a decision like this should this be made by the engineers, or should this be made by management? Management, right? So these are all kind of business related considerations, right? So I know in this class, we've done some kind of basic economic analysis in terms of present worth and things like that. But in terms of scheduling, in terms of which ones supply quicker and how that works with kind of your delivery pipeline, and managing business relationships, that's not your responsibility as an engineer. These are responsibilities for management and the business side. Okay. All right, let's do one more example. We'll get away from valves for a second. Okay. So in this example, let's say that you work for a manufacturing company, right? And so you're thinking about adopting two different or you're considering two different types of processes to produce your product. Okay. So there's no, there's no purchasing involved in this. It's just kind of an internal process, right? To produce a part or to conduct your business, there's normally lots of different ways to do things, right? And so this is kind of just a consideration between should you use one type of process or another. Okay. So we'll call them process A and process B. Okay, so process A, let's say that it is very costly. Okay. It's very expensive to perform. Maybe because of the amount of power that it requires, maybe because of the raw materials that it requires, maybe some of the cooling responsibilities, or maybe just how much you have to pay to get rid of the waste, right? So for whatever reason or not, process A is going to be very costly, right? Process B is cheaper. Okay, the opposite of costly is cheaper. But let's say that process B is known to produce a lot of pollution. We haven't quite talked about environmental engineering just yet, but it is, I think everyone should be at least aware of kind of the environmental concerns, right? But there are no laws and no regulations that regulate this process yet. You'll learn next week that kind of the relationship between engineers and the environment is that a lot of times engineering companies wait until there's a law or the law enforcement kind of forces them to make a change. And so at this time, there's no laws that regulate this yet, but of course there is a possibility that it does get regulated in the future. Okay, and so maybe if you do start to do process B, maybe 1 year, 2 years down the line, you're gonna have to switch to process A anyway, just because the law is going to forbid. Okay, or maybe there might be another process that gets discovered along that time, where you can do the same thing but with less pollution. Okay, but as of today, these are kind of your two options. So process A, which is cleaner but more costly. Process B produces a lot of pollution, but it's a lot cheaper to do. Okay. All right. And so in this situation, do you think this is a management decision or an engineering decision? Work together. Yeah. No, I think this is one where I think both sides kind of have they have kind of some skin in the game. So it's something where I would consider both the engineers and the manager have to work together to come up with something, because even if one side feels a strong way about the other, you have to come to an agreement, right? Okay. So of course, the thing that engineers, of course, would be aware of in this case is the amount of pollution that it produces. I think nowadays, if you look at a lot of the professional codes of engineering, more and more of them are including kind of tenets about the environment. And so participating in a process like this or signing off on this would, of course, violate those professional codes of ethics. But we'll talk about this next week, but there's a little bit more of a gray area in terms of the environment, because it's not, a lot of the evidence kind of there's a lot of evidence now for that, but at least in the short term, a lot of environmental effects don't have an immediate impact on human lives. A lot of environmental effects kind of take place over a longer period of time. Some engineering codes are a little bit kind of on the fence on this, and so but of course, anytime you mention pollution, I think a lot of people would just understand that we have a lot of pause, in participating in that. Right? But this is something that maybe process A is so expensive that it's just not feasible to do in terms of what you can sell the product at and how much of a profit that the company can make. And so this is something that both sides have to come to an agreement. All right, any questions on this? Okay. All right, so those are just a few examples. Of course, honestly, probably most of the decisions or most of the things that you need to do, or most of the things that are going to require a lot of thought are probably going to be similar to this last example here, where it's not something that's a clear-cut engineering decision or not a clear-cut management decision, but you have to kind of, talk to your manager and then kind of come to a consensus, right? But I think having this distinction in terms of exactly what your responsibility is and what you should be and what kinds of decisions you should make as an engineer, I think are important to understand as you enter the workforce. Okay. Okay. So next thing I want to talk about is organizational disobedience. All right. So, we've already kind of talked about a few stories of this, and some of you guys wrote about this in your individual writing assignments as well. A lot of your final projects have this as well, where there are going to be situations where you, as an engineer, or just any engineer working at a company, are going to disagree or oppose something that your company wants to do. Okay. Whether it be, taking on a certain type of project that you don't want to do, or maybe there's some of the funding for the project is coming from sources that you don't agree with, right? There's going to be situations where you just don't agree. Okay. And so there are ways to kind of practice disobedience and do it kind of in a responsible way, right? It's okay, it's okay to kind of work for a company and not agree to everything that they do, right? But it's also okay to to still work for that company because that company pays your bills, right? And so when this situation happens, it's definitely not a comfortable position, right? No one wants to be in this position where your company is doing something that you don't agree with or you don't want to participate in, but you still rely on the company for for employment, right? Because I think kind of and part of this is just kind of the reactionary nature of social media, I guess, is that a lot of times when people say that, oh, I don't like what this company does, they're, oh, like, why don't you quit, right? It's never that simple, right? And so quitting a job is not something to take lightly, because you don't know how quickly you maybe will get another job. So it's not so simple. It's just that you don't like your company or you don't agree with what they do, and so you just quit, right? Because you have bills to pay, you have family to support, or things like that. Right? So there are certain acts that you can do within a company that are responsible, that you can express your disagreement without without hopefully putting yourself in danger. I will say that this is a little bit it's a little bit outdated. The world has changed very rapidly over the last even the last couple of years. And so some of these things, the company will, so the companies might look at some of these things and see them as, maybe grounds for firing you or things like that. But these are just some kind of things to think about, beyond just going straight to the nuclear button and quitting. Okay. Okay. So the first degree of this is what I call disobedience by non-participation. Participation. Right. Disobedience. Okay. Disobedient by non-participation. So just like the name implies here, if you don't agree with a certain project or you don't want to participate in a certain project, you can ask to not participate on that and then be moved to another. Okay. Oftentimes, you'll be working for these very large engineering firms, and there's usually some mechanism within these companies to move from one project to the next. Okay. So some situations where you may want to do this is that maybe you're working on a project which has a lot of safety concerns. That there's things are being done in a certain kind of way that, that are going to put people in danger. Maybe you've already tried to kind of fix things and make things safer, but they're not working. And so to kind of avoid any kind of liability, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable kind of working on a project like this, you can be asked to move to another project and within the company and do something else. Okay. Another situation where you may do this is that maybe you're working on a project which has a negative impact on the environment, right? So one example maybe is that maybe you're working for kind of a development company or a construction company, and they're looking to kind of develop a new project or a new building or a new something within kind of a protected area like a swamp or a forest or things like that. Okay. And so if you don't feel comfortable on certain projects, you can always try to ask to be moved. Okay. It's not always an option, and so you may not always have this option, but it's never you know never a bad idea to ask. Okay. Another example of this is that which is quite common, especially for mechanical engineers. A lot of the work that mechanical engineers do, a lot of us end up working for the defense industry or defense contractor. If you don't feel comfortable, making weapons or making kind of airships or things like that, then you can be asked to move. Okay. There's a lot of different reasons why you may not feel comfortable working on a certain type of project. And so if you want to kind of stay employed with the company but work on something else, then that's always fine to do. Okay. All right. All right. Number two. Number two is disobedience by contrary action. Why? So this is when an engineer participates in activities or maybe things outside of the workplace that are contrary to the company goals. Okay. So maybe this involves, participation in an environmental group, right? Maybe a participation in a group that's dedicated to protect, a certain part of the environment that the company wants to develop. Or maybe it's involvement in a political group that is opposed to your company's work, right? It is possible to do these kinds of things. Although nowadays, with the age of social media, especially if you plan on posting things like this, your company may see that, and so this may come back to bite you in a certain way. The video that I posted kind of before the semester about kind of my opinions of the management here would fall under this category. And the video is still up, so I haven't faced any punishment for it yet. But I think the only people who saw that was you guys, so I think that's okay. Okay. And number three, another form of disobedience that you can do, probably the most extreme one, is protest. Okay. So this is kind of actively kind of outwardly kind of opposing what your company is doing by protesting against them. So of course, this is probably the type that I think most people kind of associate with disobedience because it's the most public. It's the one that often kind of makes the news and things like that. But usually this is kind of a last resort, and usually it takes some kind of organization to do this, at least for a lot of people, right? And so if you work for a company which has a strong union, this is probably something that's that the union will organize every now and then to help with negotiations or not. But hopefully it doesn't get to this because it's kind of an uncomfortable position for everybody. But it is effective, and so I think I think we've seen that for this year. All right, any questions on this? Okay. All right, so these are things that you can kind of do to express disobedience, but maybe there's another way to kind of handle an issue as well. So let's talk about what we call whistleblowing. All right. So whistleblowers are this is a term, of course, used in the news quite a lot, and I think more or less people, if you kind of follow the news to a certain degree, you probably know what this is. But the definition of a whistleblower is one who reveals the wrongdoings within an organization, either to the public or to the government. Okay. So the name whistleblower comes from kind of the I guess the connotation of like a referee in sports, right? So when someone commits a foul or someone breaks a rule and when you're playing sports, the referee is there to kind of blow their whistle, kind of stop everything and make sure things are good. So that's kind of the origin of this word. Okay. Okay. So typically whistleblowers are employees within the company. So it's someone within the company that kind of reveals these things. And that's kind of important for two reasons. So for one reason, people inside the company are usually the ones that have kind of intimate knowledge of how things are run or how things are done within a company. Right. And so usually these are people that are most qualified to blow the whistle. Okay. Because not only can they see kind of the final result, but they can see kind of all the internal processes, the internal culture that have led to certain results. Okay. But the other important part to why whistleblowers are inside people is that you know these are people that are doing something that's in direct opposition to the company, right? Whenever you whistleblow and whenever you kind of bring law enforcement or something, you bring their attention to the company, that is never going to be a good thing for the company. At least, um, not only for their financially, they may have to, pay certain fines or things like that, but also gives a lot of bad publicity as well. And so there's the fact that that last bullet point is you know really kind of important because it's some people as some people see whistleblowing as kind of being disloyal to your company, like you're kind of betraying the company. And so there's always a lot of kind of pressure within the company, whether it be explicit pressure for the company to tell you, you can't say certain things, otherwise certain things are going to happen. Some companies, put it into their contracts where, that you can't reveal certain information. But there's also kind of a lot of kind of peer pressure and a lot of, to not do these kinds of things, right? And the key word there is pressure, and that pressure can come from can kind of manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, we've very recently, we've seen a whistleblower for Boeing kind of take his life, in part due to kind of the pressure that Boeing has placed on him. So it's definitely not it's not a trivial thing. It's not a minor thing to be talking about. Okay. All right. So there are two main types of whistleblowing that we can talk about. So there's internal whistleblowing. So internal whistleblowing involves, using the channels within your company, reporting issues within the company itself, maybe to another department or maybe to a higher body, a higher authority in your company to get some things addressed. Okay. That's kind of the implication of whistleblowing is that if you're blowing the whistle on a company or a department, the assumption is that you've already tried to kind of resolve it internally, right? So whistleblowing is a very kind of extreme thing, and it shouldn't be kind of the first thing that you do, right? And so, before you kind of blow the whistle and before you go to the media, before you go to the government, the hope is that you kind of try to resolve this internally. Talk to your manager, talk to other engineers on your team, try to resolve some issues, before going outside. But of course, there are a lot of situations where that's not effective. You talk to your manager, they're just not listening to you. Talk to your other engineers, they're not listening to you. So these are kind of the situations where you would go to maybe a different department within your company, go to a higher body so that you can get something resolved. Okay. Okay. And so a lot of companies, they have HR, they have human resources that you can lodge complaints to. Another type of position that some companies have is something called an ethics officer. Some companies may have an entire ethics department that you can report things to. Now, I know that statement there comes with a lot of baggage as well, because kind of the common sentiment nowadays is that HR departments are not really there to help the employees. They're more there to protect the company, which is fundamentally is true, right? The HR department is still employed by the company, but some companies have better culture than others, right? And so you may work for a company with a better HR department, a better ethics department, and it may be effective, right? And so, before you do anything, I would talk to, maybe some people that have been there for longer, and they can kind of tell you, how effective your HR department or your ethics officer is. Okay. Okay. All right. So the other type of whistleblowing, of course, is probably the one that most people associate with the term, which is external whistleblowing. So external whistleblowing is when you go to an outside entity, whether it be some government organization. Most of the time, it's law enforcement or some kind of regulatory body, or sometimes even the media, right? So sometimes the media, may be able to kind of publish something to kind of help you out as well. Okay. Some people even consider sharing things on social media that counts as whistleblowing as well, right? But generally, if you want your claims to be taken seriously, then you need to have evidence, right? So if you go to like law enforcement or regulatory body, they're going to ask for some evidence that some things are occurring, right? And if you can bring those kinds of things, then it's most likely going to come to an investigation. Okay. One thing I want to add as well is that, I know that we're focusing mostly on engineering issues and technical issues, but whistleblowing can occur for a lot of different reasons within a company as well. So abuse of any kind in a company is also grounds for whistleblowing as well. Whether it be abuse of power, so your manager kind of, abusing his power over you to make you do things that you're not comfortable with. There's also, a lot of misconduct, sexual misconduct, harassment that occurs in companies as well. So whistleblowing, I kind of incorporate all of those things into one. Okay. The bottom line is that if your company is doing something that you're not comfortable with, either it goes against your own ethics as an engineer, or maybe you feel harassed or abused, right? You should never feel afraid to kind of report things. Okay. And there's more resources today more than ever. And so a little bit off topic, but one of my friends from high school, she started a company called Better Brave, which is kind of dedicated to empowering people to report abuses within the workplace. Because a lot of times people don't have faith in their own HR departments, they don't have faith in law enforcement, And so Better Brave was kind of created to kind of give people an opportunity to report these things in a confidential and kind of a safe way, and to kind of alert the people that need to be alerted to kind of protect yourself, right? And so, maybe within a company, maybe you don't feel comfortable kind of reporting things, but, there's definitely a lot of external resources and a lot of external places you can report things as well. So, definitely don't be afraid to blow the whistle on anything that you feel comfortable. Okay.
You said that on the front of yours, so
Wait a second.
you said that's so friend of yours, it started that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. I used to babysit her cat while she was in grad school. Okay. All right. Let's see, where are we? Okay. So, like I said, so whistleblowing is often a very serious kind of thing, right? And so you should prepare yourself not only kind of from a practical standpoint in terms of providing all the evidence, providing all the receipts for things, but also just mentally, right? And so whistleblowing is as much of as a company says that we care about you and we want you to report things, they don't, I mean, come on. But whistleblowing goes against the goals of the company, right? And so you should be prepared for kind of, also the mental strain, the mental toll of what's going to happen as well. Okay. But you should also know that whistleblowers are protected by law. So there are a lot of laws all the way up to the federal level that protect the rights of whistleblowers. Okay. So don't feel like that you have to be alone in these situations. So there's a lot of federal protections that protect these whistleblowers. Okay. Not only in terms of your identity, right? And so if you report something, or if you whistleblow, you go to a regulatory body, law enforcement, they're going to protect your identity. And it's going to protect you from retaliation from the company as well. But one thing that you should know, it is illegal for a company to retaliate against you if you're making a report or you're making a whistleblow in good faith. Okay? And retaliation can take a lot of different forms, right? And so retaliation could be, maybe they cut your hours, or it's illegal for them to fire you, right? So that's kind of the first very obvious thing that can happen, is that a company can say that they're going to let you go, but if you make a whistleblowing report, that's illegal for them to do that. It's illegal for them to kind of move you around a different project. It's illegal for them to treat you differently, right? Any form of retaliation from a company, if you're making a report, if you're making a whistleblower in good faith, is illegal. Okay, and that's really important to know, because that's when the issue comes up, that you're going to blow the whistle on a company for either kind of violating some safety standards or for abuse, right? That's kind of the implication that a lot of companies give, is that they're going to retaliate against you in some way, right? As much as they say they're not going to, it's kind of the reality. So, just be aware of these kinds of things, and if you feel like you're being retaliated against, don't be afraid to report that as well, because that can also get your company in trouble. Okay. All right. Just the number one advice that I have to give you is to try to document things, or try to gather as much evidence as you can. So the more evidence that you can gain, having things in writing, technical reports for certain things, maybe schedules, however much evidence that you can gather, it's all going to help your case with this. All right, another reason that you may want to whistleblow, besides just having just besides just being against your own personal ethics, is to avoid complicity. Okay. Okay. Complicity slash liability, right? So if you're doing something or your company's doing something that you're not comfortable with, you know, you could, and if someone else reports it, right? So someone else in your team or someone else in the company kind of reports this, but you didn't, right? Then that kind of, there's a little bit of an implication there that you were kind of complicit with it, that you were kind of approving of it as well, and you don't want to be in that situation either, right? Because you don't want to be caught in a situation like that where you're liable or complicit in something that you don't agree with. All right. Any questions on this so far? Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about today, we'll probably end a bit early, is some practical advice for whistleblowing. So if you are put in a position where you have to report something or you have to whistleblow, there's certain things that you can do to kind of make sure that you're protected and you do it in a way that's most beneficial for you. Okay, so I have 5 tips here. Number one, um, as you may, as little faith as you have it, as you may have in it in your company, it's always good to try to use the official internal channels first. Okay. That means reporting things to HR, reporting things to your ethics office, reporting things to, your manager, your manager's manager, things like, right? Try to use some of the internal channels, right? Because if things can get resolved or if things can be fixed, without involving kind of the outside, that's just kind of better for everybody, right? So use those channels, and if it doesn't work, then you can kind of go outside, or if things are moving too slow, you can go outside. Okay. Okay. Number two is to kind of be careful with how many people that you involve, and to try to be as confidential as possible. Again, if it's an issue that can be resolved, just by involving a few people, that's always better than trying to involve a lot of different people at once, right? You want to deal with general, you want to deal with things kind of as discreetly as possible. All right, number three. So number three, we've talked about this already, but to focus on issues, don't focus on personalities. Okay. People naturally get defensive when you insult their person, you insult their personality, right? You know, it's usually not your boss's you know, it's not that he's a naturally unsafe person, you know, but maybe he might be managing a project that's unsafe, right? And so focusing on the safety issues, not your boss's personality, as hard as it is, you know, that's always the best way to kind of get things resolved. Okay. Number 4, we've talked about already, but try to keep written record of as many things as possible. That was pretty obvious, and so if you keep evidence, you keep written records, then you know those things can't be disputed, right? But if you don't keep records, then it's always just turns into a he said, she said kind of thing, and that's you know that's never a win. That's not a winnable battle. All right, number 5, and then number 5, the last thing is that you know if you're going to whistleblow, you know the most constructive thing is to provide positive, constructive suggestions along with the objection. It's one thing to say that, you know, this car is being made very unsafe. It's another thing to say this car is unsafe. I think it would be safer if we move the gas tank over here. If we put a protective plate here, right? And that plate's going to cost this much, right? It may still fail, right? So the head of your company may say $5 for a steel plate is way too much money for us, right? For a car that we're selling for $2,000, but you know, at least you can say that you tried. At least you can say that you did. It's not like you didn't try to provide positive solutions. Okay. All right. Any final questions on this? Okay. All right. So let's wrap it up here. So I do have your exams, and so if you want to come up and take your exam, you can have it here. So next week, remember, like I said, next week is our last week of kind of just listening to me lecture anyway. And so on Tuesday, we're going to talk about environmental ethics, and then Thursday, we're going to talk about computer and software ethics. Okay. So kind of 2 different topics, but you know, hopefully that can kind of round things out pretty nice. Right? So thank you guys for coming this week. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I will see you guys next week.
Have a good one, Professor.
Sure.
This is about like the year 414.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Somebody told me that it's only specific ones you're allowed to sign up for as an individual without
So-
being in legacy.
Yeah. So if you're not doing a legacy project, you sign up for
Friday.
yes,
I've
the
heard.
2 Friday. I think Dr. Robson also accepts some non-legacy as well. I think Dr. Robson mostly just does Titan Rover and Titan Rocket.
Okay.
So I think she does do. I think she did maybe with 1 or 2 groups of sponsored projects. So I think hers is also available for signing up, but for the most part, it's the Friday session, either Dr. Lee or Dr.
Sign up for the Friday.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure, because I did hear that from someone and I was unsure about it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
Good.